When I was 12 years old, my mother told me that there were Jehovah's Witnesses going around the community. Now, I didn't know what a Jehovah's Witness was. But she told me if they come to our door, this is what you tell them. She said, you have to be polite, but you say, no thank you, I'm a practicing Catholic. Now, I knew I was a Catholic, but I didn't think I practiced that much. I mean, I practiced playing soccer, but I didn't practice, it's not like I stood in front of a mirror, practicing, making the sign of the cross, or I did the genuflection kind of exercises, to get, and since I was only 12 years old, I hadn't yet learned the very important Catholic task of wrapping rosary beads around my rearview mirror in a car. Hadn't learned any of that stuff. Now, if you asked me why I was a Catholic at that point, I would have said, I don't know. I really didn't know. Maybe I would have said because my parents are, because my family's Catholic. And in one sense, my sense of being Catholic wasn't much different from my sense of being Scottish at the time. Perhaps you can relate to that. It's like being Filipino or being Carolan, woohoo, Kerala, or being from Mexico, that's where one of our families is from, or being from Nigeria. A lot of Nigerians in the house, including Father Greg back there. Anyway, you know what I mean? It was like a cultural thing. I was a practicing Catholic. I believed in God, I believed in Jesus, but don't ask me too many questions, okay? Let's just leave it at that. In the gospel today, we hear the opening line that says that large crowds were following Jesus. And it's almost as if Jesus is provoked by the large crowds, because he turns around and he says something that's totally bizarre, a little bit disturbing. He says, unless you hate your mother and your father and your spouse and your children, you cannot be my disciple. Now, obviously, this is a rhetorical device. Jesus commands us to love our enemies, to love everyone, not to hate. But what he's saying is that unless I am first in your life, unless I am more important than your parents, your spouse, and your children, and later on, your possessions, and even life itself, you cannot be my disciple. And my first reaction is, who does this guy think he is, right? I mean, if Jesus is not the divine Son of God, he's a crackpot, a deluded megalomaniac. Who else could make such a claim that I have to be first in your life? And he says this to the crowd, this large crowd, this demanding statement. And then he says, whoever doesn't carry the cross cannot be my disciple. And this has to do with the particular suffering and hardship that comes with following Jesus, not just the hardships of life. We sometimes as Catholics use the phrase, carry your cross, to mean, deal with the stuff that life throws at you. But Jesus is specifically saying there's going to be a cost to following me, a specific cost. And not just any cost, but a high cost. Now let me ask you a question. What happens when you combine a large crowd with a high cost? What happens? The crowd gets smaller. And I think in many ways we've experienced that in the church over the last number of decades as our society has transformed. But Jesus then teaches the crowd that to be his disciple, they need to sit down. He gives two examples of this. You need to sit down, make an informed decision. To sit down and make an informed decision to be his disciple. By the way, let me just ask you, to invite you to think about this. Have you ever actually been stopped in your tracks so that you had to sit down and make an informed decision about being a follower of Jesus? By the way, the word disciple, in the original language, it has the same root as the word learner. So a disciple is a learner, a student. And in ancient times, students would travel and live with teachers, with rabbis. They wouldn't just learn information, they would be with the teacher. And that's the sense that Jesus is speaking about in terms of being his disciple. Jesus says there will be a high cost. Today, often in the church, there is a kind of offer of a low-cost Christianity. Sometimes we are very uncomfortable with this high-cost talk, and we seek to soften the difficult teachings of Jesus in some way, in a sense, like if we just maybe, even out the edges and conform a little bit to our society, we'll get the larger crowds. But you see, Jesus was never interested in the larger crowds. You can never accuse Jesus of false advertising. But when we offer low-cost Christianity, we get consumers, not disciples. I believe this, if you look at the history of the church, whenever Christianity is low cost, when we give the sale version, the on-sale version, the church becomes weak. But when the cost is high, the church becomes strong. I think of the church in some countries, like Father Greg is from Nigeria, and depending on where you live in Nigeria, you can be killed for being a Christian. I think of the Christians in Egypt, in Alexandria, in Cairo, the Coptic Christians. I mean, is there going to be a bomb in church this week? I mean, what would that do for mass attendance in Dartmouth? We become consumers, not disciples. And consumers, like all consumers, tend to be more introspective, interested in their own preferences. Consumers, like any consumers, religious consumers, like low prices and convenience. For instance, if you live in Dartmouth and you have to go to a mall, are you going to go to Halifax Shopping Centre or Micmac Mall? Come on. By the way, this homily is brought to you today by Micmac Mall. And when you go to Micmac Mall, do you shop around to find the highest price or the lowest price? Of course, yeah. That's what consumers do. But we've got to be very careful when we bring that mindset into our faith, where it becomes about us. It becomes about convenience, low price. Jesus says there's only high price. That's the only real thing. It's the only real version. And convenience, how the heck did we get to having convenience as a Christian value when we worship a guy who was nailed to a cross? I remember years ago, about 20 years ago, it was a number of parishes ago, I was given a second parish about a mile away, and we had a problem because both parishes had a Saturday afternoon Mass at the same time, and it was just me. And I hadn't yet learned how to be in two places at once. And so we stopped one of the Masses and combined at the other location, and the combined numbers didn't even half fill the church. Anyway, this man came to see me. He was very angry. And he sat down and he said, "Father James, my family and I have been going to this Mass at this time in this place for 537 years." Or something like that. And he said, "Because you have canceled this Mass, I have stopped giving to the collection, and I am telling other people to stop giving to the collection until you restore that Mass time." And I've never forgotten that, because what the man was basically saying was, "Father James, I don't care about you. I don't really care about the parish. What I care about is getting what I want, when I want it, and how I want it, and if you don't give it to me, I will hurt you." Right? Wasn't that what he was saying? Consumers, not disciples. Another way to look at this is fans, not followers. I think of back in my days of being a practicing Catholic. In one sense, yeah, I would say I was a fan of Jesus. I liked Jesus. I believed in him. I, waved to him from a distance. I knew about him. I knew things about him, but I can't, at that point in my life, I didn't know him personally. And even though I was a practicing Catholic, I had never made a decision to be his disciple. And it was only later in life that I found out this, that being a follower is more fun than being a fan. Now, I know that fun is not exactly the right word, but it sounds good with all the F's, the alliteration. Everyone say this, being a follower is more fun than being a fan. That even sounds fun, doesn't it? Being a follower is more fun than being a fan. When we become followers of Jesus, when we lose ourselves for him, we find ourselves. When we seek him with all our hearts find rest. We discover peace. We experience healing, fulfillment, joy, and hope. And when we place all our hope in him, God's love is poured into our hearts by the Holy Spirit. Yes, the cost is great, but it's worth every penny because being a follower is more fun than being a fan. So, crowds. I look out here today and I'm looking at, I think what we could correctly call a fairly large crowd, don't you think? Where's Ian? How many people are we today in the Mass right now? Probably about 417 people. Yes, yeah, we count you. we count you when you're not looking. Oh, we get whole files on you guys. I'm only kidding. They say we count people because people count. 417, that's pretty good. That's quite a crowd. And I think like in the time of Jesus, there are different groups of people within the crowd. And I want to ask you this morning, where are you in the crowd? Where are you in terms of your relationship with Jesus? I think the crowd, we can break into different groups of people. There are the curious. Last week I was on vacation and I was in a particular city walking down a particular street and there were buskers, these street performers. And there was crowds of people gathered around and I was curious. I looked and then I kept on going because I wasn't interested. I was just curious. And maybe you're here today watching online and you're curious about Jesus, who he is, his claims, his invitations. But maybe you're more than curious. Maybe you've actually stopped, like the buskers, you've stopped and you're actually watching a little bit and enjoying it and connecting with it. Not yet ready to put anything in the collection, if you know what I mean. But you're interested, you're moving beyond curiosity. Maybe you're here today and that's where you are spiritually. You're interested. Jesus is beginning to knock at the door of your heart. Perhaps you are a fan. Perhaps you're even a loyal fan. Perhaps you're a season ticket holder. But you haven't yet sat down and made the decision to be a disciple. That's the curious thing. Jesus is quite clear in this parable that a decision is made, an informed decision to be his follower. And then perhaps you're here today and you're like, yeah, I'm a follower. I made that decision years ago. I remember when it happened. I remember a series of small decisions. And here's the thing. If you already know this, if you're a follower of Jesus, it's a decision we have to make over and over and over again. And then finally, there was another category that I thought of as I was finishing my homily yesterday, and that is the dragged along. There's some in every crowd that were dragged along. And perhaps you're here today because you were dragged along by your parents. And at this point, you can relate to what Jesus said about hating your parents. I'm only kidding. Perhaps you were dragged along by your parents. Maybe your spouse dragged you here. Maybe a friend. You're thinking, what am I doing here? Maybe your sense of guilt dragged you here. Your sense of obligation. I don't know. But you're here. And guess what? Jesus knows you. He loves you. He wants to reveal himself to you. He wants you to have a relationship with him as well. And so, brothers and sisters, regardless of where we are in the crowd, Jesus speaks to each and every single one of us saying, come to me, come to me. And he invites us to make an informed decision. So here's what I'm going to ask you this week. Some point this week, take some time to sit down and think. Number one, where am I? Who am I in the crowd? Where am I in my relationship with Jesus? And am I ready to make a decision to be his follower? Because it's way more fun than being his fan.